Imagine a queen so powerful, so strategic, that she held the fate of one of history's greatest empires in her hands. But what if her legend is far more dramatic, and her influence even more profound than you ever imagined? Get ready to uncover the true story of Cleopatra, the last pharaoh whose life was a high-stakes gamble with the might of Rome. Welcome to our world of discovery and adventure. This channel is all about exploring the unknown, explaining the incredible, and revealing the truth behind the most fascinating topics on Earth. If you love learning something new every day, you're in the right place. Now we explore, explain, Cleopatra, Egypt's last pharaoh of power and legacy. In the grand tapestry of ancient history, few figures have captured the imagination of the world quite like Cleopatra VII Philopater, the last active ruler of the Ptolemaic kingdom of Egypt. Her name evokes an aura of beauty, intelligence, seduction, and political brilliance. Yet beyond the romanticized image that centuries of art, literature, and cinema have projected, Cleopatra was a ruler of profound intellect, a strategist of exceptional skill, and a monarch who sought to preserve Egypt's independence amid the rising dominance of Rome. To understand Cleopatra is to journey through the twilight of ancient Egypt, where the sands of time witnessed the last breath of pharaonic glory. Part 1 of this exploration traces the world into which Cleopatra was born, the dynasty that shaped her, and the circumstances that set her on a path to become not merely Egypt's last queen, but one of history's most enduring icons. Cleopatra VII was born around 69 BCE in Alexandria, Egypt, the magnificent capital founded by Alexander the Great some 3 centuries earlier. Her lineage descended from Ptolemy I Soter, one of Alexander's most trusted generals, who, after the conqueror's death, took control of Egypt and established the Ptolemaic dynasty. The Ptolemies were of Macedonian Greek origin, and though they ruled an ancient Egyptian land, they remained largely Hellenistic in their culture, language, and governance. For generations, the Ptolemaic rulers clung to their Greek identity, often isolating themselves from the Egyptian populace. They married within their own family, a practice that sought to preserve dynastic purity, but also led to political rivalries, intrigue, and occasional fratricide. The Egypt into which Cleopatra was born was thus a realm of immense cultural complexity, a nation where Greek and Egyptian traditions intertwined yet remained distinct. Cleopatra's childhood unfolded within the opulent yet volatile confines of the royal court. The Ptolemaic dynasty, though still commanding wealth and prestige, was by her birth a shadow of its former might. Egypt's economy was declining, and Rome, the rising superpower of the Mediterranean, was tightening its grip on the region's politics. The once great empire of the Nile now found itself dependent on Roman favor, with its rulers acting more like client monarchs than independent sovereigns. Cleopatra's father, Ptolemy XII Auletes, known as the flute player for his love of music, was both a patron of the arts and a ruler whose reign was marked by weakness and instability. He maintained his throne largely through lavish bribes to Roman politicians, ensuring their support in exchange for Egypt's continued subservience. His rule plunged Egypt into financial ruin and provoked widespread discontent among the people. From an early age, Cleopatra exhibited qualities that set her apart from her siblings. She was exceptionally intelligent, mastering several languages, including Egyptian, something few of her Ptolemaic predecessors had done. This ability to communicate directly with her subjects helped her forge a connection that transcended her Greek heritage. She studied philosophy, astronomy, mathematics, and rhetoric, and was said to have been a skilled orator with a commanding presence. Ancient writers such as Plutarch and Dio Cassius describe her not merely as a woman of physical beauty, but as one whose charm, wit, and eloquence captivated all who met her. These attributes would later become her greatest weapons in navigating the treacherous currents of power that defined her life. Cleopatra's early years were also shaped by political chaos. Her father's reliance on Rome had made him unpopular among his own people, and in 58 BCE, a revolt forced him to flee Egypt. He sought refuge in Rome, leaving behind his daughters Cleopatra VI and Berenice IV to rule in his absence. During this time, young Cleopatra, still a child, likely witnessed firsthand the fragility of royal authority and the ever-looming threat of internal rebellion. Berenice IV's rule was short-lived. When Ptolemy XII returned to Egypt with Roman military support, he had his daughter executed, reasserting his control over the throne. The episode served as a grim lesson to Cleopatra about the ruthless realities of dynastic politics and the lengths to which rulers must go to maintain power. When Ptolemy XII died in 51 BCE, Cleopatra, at the age of 18, ascended the throne alongside her 10-year-old brother, Ptolemy XIII. According to tradition, the siblings were married, as was customary within the Ptolemaic line, though Cleopatra soon proved unwilling to share authority. Her early reign was marked by tension between her and the powerful courtiers who supported her brother. While Cleopatra sought to rule independently, her youth and gender made her vulnerable to conspiracies within the palace. Nonetheless, she demonstrated remarkable political acumen. She took immediate steps to stabilize Egypt's economy, facing a devastating famine brought on by low Nile floods. She ensured that grain supplies were regulated, taxes were adjusted, and the administration maintained its efficiency. Her actions reflected both her awareness of Egypt's dependence on the Nile and her pragmatic approach to governance. At the same time, Cleopatra was acutely aware of Egypt's precarious position in global politics. The Roman Republic was in turmoil, torn by the rivalry between Julius Caesar, Pompey the Great, and Crassus, the triumvirate that had divided Rome's vast territories. Egypt, strategically located and rich in resources, was a prize coveted by all sides. Cleopatra sought to maneuver Egypt's interests carefully, maintaining a semblance of neutrality while securing Rome's goodwill. Yet the political storm in Rome would soon sweep across the Mediterranean and change her fate forever. The conflict between Cleopatra and her brother came to a head in 48 BCE. The royal court split into factions, with Ptolemy XIII's advisors, notably the powerful eunuch Pothinus, plotting to depose Cleopatra. She was forced to flee Alexandria, taking refuge in the eastern deserts of Egypt and gathering support from loyal forces. Her exile, however, was temporary. That same year, Pompey, defeated by Julius Caesar at the Battle of Pharsalus, fled to Egypt seeking asylum. Ptolemy XIII, hoping to win Caesar's favor, had his daughter executed, reasserting his control over the throne. The episode served as a grim lesson to Cleopatra about the ruthless realities of dynastic politics and the lengths to which rulers must go to maintain power. The ensuing conflict, known as the Alexandrian War, saw Caesar's forces besieged within the royal quarter of Alexandria as Ptolemy XIII's army attempted to expel them. The city became a battleground of fire and intrigue, with parts of the Great Library of Alexandria reportedly destroyed in the chaos. Cleopatra remained at Caesar's side throughout the conflict, displaying both courage and cunning. When Caesar's reinforcements arrived, Ptolemy's forces were defeated, and the young king drowned while fleeing across the Nile. Cleopatra, victorious, was restored to the throne, now ruling alongside her younger brother, Ptolemy XIV, though in truth she held absolute power. Cleopatra's relationship with Caesar transcended politics. She became his lover and bore him a son, Caesarion, Ptolemy XV, whom she declared as co-ruler and the rightful heir of both Egypt and Rome's greatest leader. Their union scandalized Rome, where Caesar's political enemies decried his association with a foreign queen. Yet for Cleopatra, this alliance represented the culmination of her strategic vision, a fusion of Egyptian sovereignty with Roman might. She accompanied Caesar to Rome in 46 BCE, where her presence stirred fascination and controversy alike. She resided in Caesar's villa beyond the Tiber River, appearing in public as the incarnation of the goddess Isis, a divine ruler who blended Egyptian mysticism with Roman ambition. In Rome, Cleopatra witnessed firsthand the splendor and corruption of the Republic at its peak. She observed its senators, orators, and generals, the men who shaped the destiny of the Mediterranean world. For a time, it seemed as if her dream of restoring Egypt's greatness might be realized through her partnership with Caesar. Yet fate would intervene once more. In 44 BCE, Caesar was assassinated by a group of senators led by Brutus and Cassius, shattering the delicate balance of power upon which Cleopatra's future depended. Her position in Rome became untenable, and she returned to Alexandria with her son, now heir to a kingdom once more standing on uncertain ground. By the time Cleopatra returned to Alexandria, she had transformed from a young queen into a seasoned ruler. Her reign entered a new phase, one defined by consolidation, cultural revival, and a renewed assertion of Egypt's independence. She strengthened the economy through trade with Arabia and Africa, supported scientific and intellectual endeavors, and promoted herself as the living embodiment of Isis, a divine mother, protector, and symbol of continuity. Under her rule, Alexandria once again flourished as a center of learning and art, its lighthouse and library serving as beacons of civilization in a world increasingly dominated by Rome's imperial ambition. Cleopatra's mastery of self-presentation became one of her most potent tools. In a world where women seldom held political authority, she crafted an image that transcended gender and nationality. To the Egyptians, she was the pharaoh and goddess. To the Greeks, she was a philosopher queen in the Platonic mold. And to the Romans, she was a formidable ally or rival who commanded both respect and fear. Her ability to navigate these overlapping identities demonstrated not only her intelligence, but her profound understanding of the power of narrative. Cleopatra did not merely rule Egypt, she performed it, embodying the nation's ancient grandeur at a time when its sovereignty teetered on the edge of extinction. When Cleopatra returned to Egypt following Julius Caesar's assassination in 44 BCE, she found herself in a world far more unstable than the one she had left behind. The death of Caesar had shattered the delicate balance of power in Rome, plunging the Republic into a new civil war. The triumvirate of Mark Antony, Octavian, the future Emperor Augustus, and Lepidus now ruled in Caesar's place, dividing the vast Roman territories among themselves. For Cleopatra, this period represented both a grave danger and a tremendous opportunity. Her connection to Caesar had elevated her stature, but had also made her a potential target in Rome's ruthless power struggles. Her challenge was to navigate this shifting political landscape and secure Egypt's sovereignty in the face of encroaching Roman domination. In the aftermath of Caesar's death, Cleopatra's position was precarious. Many Romans viewed her with suspicion, branding her as an enchantress who had ensnared their beloved general. The fact that she had borne Caesar's son, Caesarion, was even more alarming to Caesar's heir, Octavian, who feared the boy could someday challenge his own claim to leadership. Cleopatra's immediate priority was to protect her kingdom and her son. She withdrew from Rome, focusing on strengthening Egypt's agricultural wealth while maintaining cautious neutrality in Roman affairs. Yet she could not remain isolated for long, for Egypt's fate was inextricably tied to the politics of Rome. Cleopatra's reign during these years was marked by careful diplomacy and pragmatic leadership. She invested heavily in the restoration of Egypt's agricultural wealth, ensuring that the annual flooding of the Nile was efficiently managed to maximize grain production. Egypt remained the granary of the Mediterranean, its agricultural output vital to Rome's food supply. Cleopatra used this economic leverage to maintain her political independence. She also continued to cultivate the divine image of herself as the living incarnation of the goddess Isis, reinforcing her legitimacy in the eyes of her Egyptian subjects and strengthening the unifying bond between monarch and people. Her court in Alexandria flourished as a hub of culture and intellect, drawing philosophers, mathematicians, poets, and scholars from across the Hellenistic world. The queen's patronage of knowledge and the arts symbolized her vision of Egypt as a bastion of civilization amid the turbulence of Roman politics. In 42 BCE, as the triumvirs prepared to confront the assassins of Julius Caesar at the Battle of Philippi, Cleopatra faced new pressures.
Both sides sought her support, aware of Egypt's immense wealth and strategic location. Mark Antony, one of the triumvirs and a trusted ally of Caesar, emerged victorious along with Octavian. After their triumph, Antony assumed control of the eastern provinces of the Roman Empire, while Octavian ruled the west. It was inevitable that Antony and Cleopatra's paths would cross, for Egypt's resources were essential to sustaining Antony's campaigns in the east. Yet their meeting would prove to be far more than a political negotiation. It would mark the beginning of one of history's most fabled romances.
In 41 BCE, Antony summoned Cleopatra to meet him in Tarsus, in present-day Turkey, to explain her political loyalties and ensure her allegiance to the new Roman order. Cleopatra, aware of the significance of this encounter, prepared for it not as a subordinate monarch, but as a queen equal to any Roman general. Ancient historians describe her dramatic entrance into Tarsus as a scene of deliberate magnificence. She sailed up the Cydnus River on a golden barge, its purple sails billowing in the wind, oars of silver flashing in the sunlight, and attendants dressed as cupids fanning her beneath a canopy of gold. Cleopatra herself reclined beneath a cloth of gold, dressed as the goddess Aphrodite, radiating divinity and command. The spectacle was not mere vanity, it was a masterstroke of political theater. Antony, renowned for his appreciation of grandeur and excess, was utterly captivated. In Cleopatra, he found not just a queen, but a counterpart, a ruler who understood both the language of power and the art of persuasion. Their first meeting set the stage for an alliance that would define the final chapter of both their lives. Cleopatra invited Antony to dine with her, and their banquets became legendary for their luxury and wit. Yet beneath the layers of seduction and charm lay a calculated political partnership. Cleopatra needed Roman support to protect Egypt and secure Caesarion's future. Antony, in turn, required Egypt's wealth to finance his ambitions in the east, particularly his planned campaigns against the Parthians. Their union, therefore, was as much a convergence of interests as of passions. Ancient chroniclers, often biased by Roman propaganda, depicted Cleopatra as a temptress who ensnared Antony through her beauty and cunning. However, modern scholarship portrays their relationship as one of mutual respect and shared purpose, two leaders bound by political necessity and personal affinity. Cleopatra and Antony soon became inseparable. After their meeting in Tarsus, Antony followed her to Alexandria, where their affair deepened and their political partnership solidified. The city once again became a center of celebration and intrigue as the queen hosted lavish feasts and festivals in honor of her Roman consort. One of their most famous indulgences was the Society of Inimitable Livers, a group devoted to luxury, wine, and philosophical conversation. Yet behind the decadence, serious political planning was underway. Cleopatra sought to ensure that Egypt's sovereignty would be preserved in a world increasingly dominated by Rome. Antony, for his part, saw in Cleopatra not just a lover, but a vital ally who could support his military campaigns and legitimize his claim to the legacy of Alexander the Great. Their union produced 3 children, the twins Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene, and later Ptolemy Philadelphus. Cleopatra envisioned these offspring as heirs to a new Hellenistic empire that would unite East and West under her lineage. To the Egyptian people, this family symbolized divine continuity. To the Romans, it represented a dangerous merging of power that threatened Rome's supremacy. The relationship between Antony and Cleopatra soon drew the ire of Octavian, who was consolidating his position in Rome. He viewed Antony's growing attachment to Egypt as both a personal betrayal and a political liability.
The rivalry between the two men would ultimately culminate in one of the most dramatic confrontations of the ancient world.
In 40 BCE, Antony returned to Rome to secure his position and reconcile with Octavian. As part of their political arrangement, he married Octavian's sister, Octavia, a union meant to solidify peace between the two triumvirs. Cleopatra, however, remained in Alexandria, pregnant with Antony's children. Despite his Roman marriage, Antony's bond with Cleopatra endured. When he later returned to the east in 37 BCE, he reunited with her, and together they renewed their alliance. It was during this period that Antony launched his ill-fated campaign against Parthia, a venture that ended in military failure and damaged his standing in Rome. Yet Cleopatra remained steadfast in her support, providing troops, ships, and supplies. Her wealth and resources proved indispensable, demonstrating once again her political acumen and the depth of her influence over Antony. Cleopatra's ambitions extended beyond mere survival. She envisioned herself as the restorer of Egyptian greatness, reviving the imperial grandeur of the pharaohs. Under her rule, Egyptian culture flourished. Temples were restored, trade expanded across the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean, and artistic expression thrived in Alexandria's cosmopolitan environment. The queen's self-presentation as the goddess Isis continued to shape her public image, reinforcing the fusion of religion and politics that had defined Egyptian monarchy for millennia. Her court became a symbol of wealth and enlightenment, even as the forces of Rome grew increasingly hostile. By 34 BCE, Antony and Cleopatra's partnership had reached its zenith. Following his campaigns in Armenia, Antony staged a grand ceremony in Alexandria, known as the Donations of Alexandria. In this event, he publicly distributed territories and titles to Cleopatra and their children, declaring Caesarion as the rightful son of Julius Caesar and King of Kings. Cleopatra was proclaimed Queen of Egypt, Cyprus, Libya, and Syria, while their children were granted dominion over land stretching from Armenia to the Euphrates. The ceremony was both a political statement and a symbolic challenge to Rome's authority. It represented the culmination of Cleopatra's dream of a new Hellenistic empire led by her dynasty, one that would rival Rome's might and restore Egypt's preeminence. In Rome, the Donations of Alexandria sent shockwaves through the political establishment. Octavian seized upon the event to portray Antony as a traitor who had betrayed Roman values for the sake of an Eastern queen. He circulated propaganda depicting Cleopatra as a seductive foreigner who had bewitched Antony and lured him into abandoning his Roman identity. Roman poets and orators described her as the embodiment of decadent luxury, a threat to the masculine virtues of the Republic. This campaign of vilification was not merely personal, it was political. By framing the conflict as a struggle between Rome and Egypt, between Roman discipline and Eastern excess, Octavian rallied public opinion to his side.
As tensions mounted, Cleopatra prepared Egypt for the inevitable confrontation. She mobilized her fleet, strengthened fortifications along the coast, and amassed supplies for the coming war. Antony, now openly allied with Cleopatra, divorced Octavia and established his base in Alexandria. Their combined forces represented one of the most formidable military powers of the age, but the odds were against them. Octavian controlled Rome's resources, commanded loyalty in the Senate, and possessed a powerful propaganda machine that cast Antony and Cleopatra as enemies of the state. The climactic confrontation came in 31 BCE at the Battle of Actium, off the western coast of Greece. Antony and Cleopatra's fleet, composed of massive warships, faced Octavian's smaller but more agile navy under the command of his brilliant admiral Agrippa. The battle raged for hours, but confusion and exhaustion soon took their toll. Accounts vary, but it is widely believed that when Cleopatra's ships retreated from the battle, Antony followed, abandoning the fight. Whether this was a premeditated strategy or a moment of panic remains debated, but the result was catastrophic. Octavian's forces achieved a decisive victory, and Antony and Cleopatra were forced to flee to Egypt. The defeat at Actium marked the beginning of the end for both Antony and Cleopatra. Their empire of dreams crumbled as Octavian's legions advanced toward Egypt. Yet even in the face of impending disaster, Cleopatra did not surrender easily. She sought to negotiate with Octavian, offering her wealth and even her throne in exchange for the safety of her children. But Octavian's ambitions extended beyond diplomacy. He sought total conquest. He aimed not only to annex Egypt, but to eliminate any potential rival to his rule, including Caesarion, whose very existence threatened his claim as Caesar's rightful heir. In 30 BCE, Octavian's forces reached Alexandria. The once glorious city descended into chaos as Antony's army disintegrated. Misled by false reports of Cleopatra's death, Antony fell on his sword, mortally wounded. When Cleopatra learned of his condition, she had him brought to her mausoleum, where he died in her arms, a tragic echo of their shared ambitions and love. Plutarch's account immortalized the scene as one of the most poignant in history, the fall of two lovers who had dared to challenge the might of Rome. Cleopatra, now alone, faced her final test. Octavian entered Alexandria as a conqueror, determined to take her captive and parade her through Rome in triumph. But Cleopatra, the queen who had defied empires, chose to die on her own terms. According to ancient tradition, she arranged for a basket of figs to be brought to her chamber, concealing within it an asp, a venomous Egyptian serpent. She took the snake to her breast and allowed its poison to claim her life. Whether this account is literal or symbolic, it remains one of history's most enduring images. Cleopatra, the last pharaoh of Egypt, dying as she had lived, with dignity, defiance, and command over her fate.
The death of Antony and the imminent collapse of Egyptian independence marked the beginning of the most tragic and mythic phase of Cleopatra's story. The great queen, who had once ruled from the throne of Alexandria as both goddess and monarch, now found herself surrounded by Roman legions, with her fate in the hands of Octavian, the man who would soon become Rome's first emperor, Augustus. Yet even in defeat, Cleopatra retained her majesty and composure. Her death would become a final act of defiance, a statement of sovereignty in a world that sought to strip her of it. To understand Cleopatra's final days is to witness the convergence of politics, passion, and symbolism that defined her reign and transformed her into one of the most enduring figures in human history. After Antony's death, Cleopatra took refuge in her mausoleum, the grand tomb she had been constructing for years, a monument both to her dynasty and to her own legacy. Contemporary accounts describe how she had filled it with gold, jewels, and treasures, intending to take them with her into the afterlife should the need arise. Octavian, upon entering Alexandria, immediately sought to capture her alive. He knew the value of parading Cleopatra through Rome in chains as the ultimate symbol of his victory, just as earlier Roman generals had displayed conquered kings and queens before the jubilant citizens. But Cleopatra, who had spent her life mastering the art of statecraft, understood the theater of power as well as he did. She refused to allow herself to be reduced to a trophy of conquest. Plutarch's account of their meeting paints a vivid portrait of two masters of political performance confronting one another in the ruins of an empire. Octavian entered her chamber to find her pale, disheveled, and dressed in mourning, yet still radiating a quiet authority. She presented herself not as a defeated ruler, but as a sovereign negotiating the terms of her dignity. She spoke eloquently, pleading for the safety of her children and seeking assurance that they would be spared. Octavian, who prided himself on his restraint, assured her that her life would be spared, but Cleopatra understood that mercy from Rome was merely another form of humiliation. She was to be taken to Rome as a prisoner, displayed in chains before a cheering mob, her body and soul offered as propaganda to secure Octavian's claim to greatness. Cleopatra was not willing to endure that fate.
For a woman whose entire identity was bound to the notion of divine kingship, to be paraded as a captive was worse than death. Ancient Egypt had long revered the pharaoh as a living god, the intermediary between heaven and earth. To die by her own hand, therefore, was not an act of despair, but an assertion of divine agency. It was an echo of the mythology of Isis, who restored her husband Osiris from death, a cycle of life, death, and rebirth that lay at the heart of Egyptian spirituality. Cleopatra's final decision to end her life was thus both deeply personal and profoundly symbolic. It represented the end of one world and the birth of another. The details of her death have been the subject of fascination and speculation for centuries. The traditional account holds that Cleopatra arranged for a basket of figs to be delivered to her chamber, concealing within it a venomous asp, a symbol of Egyptian royalty and divine power. After dismissing her attendants, she took the serpent to her breast, allowing it to bite her and deliver its fatal poison. When Octavian's soldiers entered her chamber, they found her lifeless body lying upon a golden couch, her two handmaidens, Iris and Charmian, dead beside her. Charmian, said to be adjusting the queen's diadem as she took her final breath, uttered the immortal words recorded by Plutarch. It was well done and fitting for a descendant of so many kings.
Modern historians have questioned the accuracy of this account. Some suggest that Cleopatra may have used a mixture of poisons rather than a snakebite, given the uncertainty of the asp's lethality and the logistical challenges of concealing one. Others propose that her death was assisted or even orchestrated by Octavian himself to prevent her from becoming a rallying symbol for Egyptian resistance. Yet, regardless of the method, the meaning remains unchanged. Cleopatra died as she lived, on her own terms, with regal grace, commanding the stage of history until her final moment. The aftermath of Cleopatra's death was both immediate and irreversible. Octavian ordered that she and Antony be buried together in the tomb she had prepared, a gesture of political theater designed to present himself as merciful and magnanimous. Yet this gesture also symbolized the final extinguishing of Egypt's ancient sovereignty. With Cleopatra's death, the Ptolemaic dynasty, descendants of Alexander's Macedonian general Ptolemy I, came to an end after nearly 3 centuries of rule. Egypt, once the most powerful kingdom of the ancient world, was annexed as a Roman province, its immense wealth now serving the coffers of Rome. The fate of Cleopatra's children reflected the harsh realities of imperial politics. Caesarion, her son by Julius Caesar, and the last legitimate heir to both Egyptian and Roman power, was captured and executed on Octavian's orders. Too many Caesars, Octavian is said to have remarked, encapsulating the ruthless logic of Roman ambition. Cleopatra's surviving children by Antony, Alexander Helios, Cleopatra Selene, and Ptolemy Philadelphus were taken to Rome, where they were paraded in Octavian's triumph. It was a cruel spectacle. The children of the queen who had once ruled as a goddess now displayed as captives of Rome. However, unlike their mother, they were spared. Cleopatra Selene, the daughter, was later married to King Juba II of Mauritania, where she became a respected queen and patron of learning. Through her, Cleopatra's bloodline survived, influencing the cultures of North Africa and Rome alike. The annexation of Egypt in 30 BCE marked the end of the Hellenistic Age and the dawn of the Roman Empire. Octavian, soon to be known as Augustus, used Cleopatra's downfall to consolidate his power and legitimize his new regime. In Rome, he commissioned poets and historians to depict Cleopatra as the villain of the story, the foreign temptress whose seduction had nearly brought down a great Roman hero. Virgil's Aeneid painted her as the embodiment of Eastern decadence, a symbol of chaos defeated by Roman virtue. Horace, in his Odes, portrayed her death as a moment of purification, a necessary act to restore moral order. The propaganda was clear.
Rome's victory over Cleopatra was not merely a military conquest, but a triumph of civilization over corruption, masculinity over femininity, and reason over passion. Yet, as the centuries passed, this Roman narrative began to evolve. Cleopatra's legend refused to die. The woman whom Augustus had sought to erase became a figure of endless fascination, a mirror through which successive generations would project their own ideas about power, beauty, and identity. In the Roman imagination, she remained the fatal queen, the enchantress who brought mighty men to ruin. In the Middle Ages, she was transformed into a cautionary tale of lust and ambition, her story used by moralists to warn against the dangers of female authority. But even in these distorted depictions, the magnetism of her character persisted. She could not be reduced to merely a villain. Her intelligence and charisma continued to shine through the layers of propaganda and myth.
The rebirth of Cleopatra's image in the Renaissance marked the beginning of her transformation from a symbol of defeat to one of empowerment. Scholars and artists rediscovered the classical sources, fascinated by her beauty, intellect, and tragic fate. Painters such as Michelangelo, Titian, and Guido Reni depicted her death in scenes of dramatic poignancy, emphasizing her courage and sensuality. Playwrights and poets began to reinterpret her story not as one of moral failure, but as the struggle of a powerful woman against the inexorable forces of history. She became an icon of human complexity, a ruler, a lover, a mother, and a visionary undone by the collision of personal and political destiny. The most influential reimagining of Cleopatra came from the pen of William Shakespeare in the early 17th century. His Antony and Cleopatra immortalized her as one of the greatest characters in world literature, passionate, witty, mercurial, and magnificently human. Shakespeare's Cleopatra is not merely a seductress, she is a sovereign spirit, commanding her own fate even as she succumbs to love and tragedy. "Give me my robe, put on my crown, I have immortal longings in me," she declares before her death, a line that captures the essence of her legend, a woman who seeks eternity not through conquest, but through the assertion of her own divine will. Through Shakespeare, Cleopatra became a timeless figure of drama and defiance, a queen whose humanity transcended the confines of her era. In the centuries that followed, Cleopatra continued to inspire artists, writers, and thinkers across cultures. The Enlightenment saw her discussed by historians as a political strategist rather than merely a lover of powerful men. The Romantic era, with its fascination for passion and rebellion, elevated her to a mythic status, a heroine who embodied the eternal conflict between reason and emotion, duty and desire. Painters such as Lawrence Alma-Tadema and Jean-Léon Gérôme rendered her in scenes of opulent splendor, capturing both her allure and her melancholy. Operas, ballets, and poems celebrated her as the embodiment of the exotic East, a projection of Europe's fascination with ancient Egypt as both a cradle of civilization and a land of mystery. Yet, beneath the layers of artistic interpretation, the historical Cleopatra remained a woman of remarkable intellect and political skill. Modern scholarship, drawing on archaeological evidence and critical analysis of ancient sources, has sought to reconstruct the real queen behind the legend. What emerges is a portrait of a ruler who was both deeply human and profoundly visionary. Cleopatra was not merely the last pharaoh of Egypt. She was the last link in a chain of monarchs stretching back to the dawn of recorded history, the final guardian of a civilization that had shaped the world's understanding of art, science, and spirituality. Her reign represented the culmination of Egypt's 3,000-year experiment in divine kingship, a system that fused religion, governance, and culture into a single vision of cosmic order.
Cleopatra's political genius lay in her ability to adapt to changing realities without losing her sense of identity. She spoke multiple languages,
understood the customs of her people, and navigated the labyrinth of Roman politics with strategic precision. Her alliance with Julius Caesar was not a reckless love affair, but a calculated move to secure Egypt's independence amid Rome's expansion. Her partnership with Antony, though ultimately doomed, was a continuation of that strategy, an attempt to forge a new geopolitical order in which Egypt would not be a vassal state, but a partner in empire. In every sense, Cleopatra's life was an act of resistance against the tide of history. She stood at the intersection of two worlds, the ancient and the modern, the Egyptian and the Roman, the feminine and the imperial. The fall of Cleopatra did not merely mark the end of a dynasty, it marked the end of an era. With Egypt's incorporation into the Roman Empire, the Mediterranean world entered a new age of imperial uniformity. The grandeur of the pharaohs faded into legend, their monuments swallowed by sand and time. Yet Cleopatra's story ensured that Egypt's spirit would never be forgotten. Her name became synonymous with majesty and allure, her image a universal symbol of power and mystery. From the temples of Isis to the palaces of Rome, from Renaissance paintings to Hollywood films, Cleopatra's shadow stretched across millennia, a reminder that the human desire for beauty, freedom, and self-determination transcends all empires. By the time Octavian returned to Rome, bearing the treasures of Egypt and the ashes of its queen, he had achieved what no Roman before him had dared, the creation of an empire that spanned continents. Yet even in his triumph, Cleopatra's legacy lingered like an unspoken challenge. He could conquer her kingdom, but he could not conquer her myth. In death as in life, Cleopatra remained unconquered, a queen whose power lay not merely in armies or wealth, but in the force of her personality and the depth of her vision. Her story, preserved through history, art, and imagination, would continue to evolve, inspiring generations to question the nature of power, love, and destiny.
As the curtain began to fall on the Ptolemaic dynasty, Cleopatra found herself caught in the whirlpool of power that defined the final years of the Roman Republic. Her intelligence, charisma, and ambition had propelled her to the forefront of global politics. But those same traits would also place her in the deadly path of empire-building men whose eyes were fixed on dominion. The relationship between Cleopatra and Mark Antony had evolved into something larger than personal affection. It had become a symbol of resistance to Rome's growing hegemony. Yet, beneath the grandeur and romance lay a web of political desperation, military miscalculation, and shifting loyalties that would ultimately lead to the tragic end of one of history's most captivating figures. The alliance between Cleopatra and Mark Antony reached its zenith after the birth of their twins, Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene, and later their youngest son, Ptolemy Philadelphus. For Cleopatra, these children represented more than personal joy. They were the tangible hope of reviving the Ptolemaic bloodline through Roman power. Antony, equally captivated by the Egyptian queen's brilliance and splendor, began to shape his political ambitions around her. When Antony granted Cleopatra vast territories in what historians call the Donations of Alexandria, he envisioned the rebirth of an Eastern empire ruled in partnership with her. Cleopatra was declared Queen of Kings, her children named as rulers of various Eastern lands. It was a public challenge to the authority of Octavian, the future Augustus, who was consolidating his power in Rome. In the eyes of Octavian and his supporters, Antony's devotion to Cleopatra represented treasonous betrayal. The Roman public, already wary of Eastern influence and fearful of monarchy, saw in Cleopatra an embodiment of decadence and corruption. Octavian's propaganda machine skillfully painted her as a foreign temptress who had bewitched Antony, turning him against his moral and political duties. pamphlets and speeches circulated through the streets of Rome, portraying Antony as enslaved by passion and Cleopatra as the manipulative sorceress responsible for his moral and political decay. This image would survive for centuries, shaping Western imagination about Cleopatra as the archetype of the dangerous, exotic woman. But the truth, as history often reveals, was far more complex. Cleopatra was not the destroyer of Antony's virtue. She was her partner in a shared dream of restoring balance between East and West. The world they envisioned, a fusion of Greek, Egyptian, and Roman ideals, was not mere fantasy. It reflected a genuine geopolitical strategy, one that might have succeeded under different circumstances. Cleopatra understood the cultural and economic significance of Egypt's position. The Nile Valley, fertile and rich, remained the granary of the Mediterranean. Control over Egypt meant control over the food supply to Rome's masses. Octavian knew this well, and he could not allow such vital resources to fall into the sway of a rival power base.
The fatal clash between Octavian and Antony was inevitable. In 31 BCE, the conflict culminated in the famous Battle of Actium, a naval engagement off the coast of western Greece. Cleopatra, commanding her own fleet alongside Antony's, played a decisive role. Yet the battle was less about military prowess and more about morale and loyalty. Octavian's admiral Agrippa executed brilliant maneuvers that cut off Antony's supplies and demoralized his forces. Rumors of desertion spread through the ranks. Amidst the chaos, Cleopatra's flagship broke through the Roman blockade, and Antony followed her. To Octavian's propagandists, this retreat appeared as a cowardly flight motivated by love. In truth, it was a calculated move to preserve the remnants of their fleet and regroup in Egypt. But perception, not reality, defines politics, and Rome now saw Antony as defeated and Cleopatra as the instigator of his downfall. Upon their return to Egypt, Cleopatra sought to rebuild her strength. She fortified the defenses of Alexandria, amassed what remained of her navy, and prepared for the inevitable Roman invasion. Yet cracks had already begun to appear in Antony's confidence. His Roman allies had deserted him, and Octavian's legions were advancing with unstoppable momentum. Cleopatra, however, remained composed. Her mind turned once again to diplomacy. She attempted to negotiate with Octavian, offering her allegiance and even the throne itself, if he would spare her children. Octavian, as pragmatic as always, listened but made no promises. He understood that Cleopatra's death would mark the end of Egypt's independence, and with it, the completion of Rome's dominion over the Mediterranean world. Antony, meanwhile, spiraled into despair. His once formidable pride now eroded by betrayal and defeat, he found solace only in Cleopatra's presence. Their love, forged in power, was now bound by tragedy. Ancient historians like Plutarch describe how Antony, upon hearing false reports that Cleopatra had taken her own life, fell upon his sword in anguish. Mortally wounded, he was carried to the mausoleum where Cleopatra had taken refuge, dying in her arms. In that moment, the grandeur of their partnership dissolved into the intimate silence of loss. The man who had commanded legions, conquered empires, and defied Rome now lay lifeless beside the woman for whom he had risked everything. Cleopatra's world collapsed around her. With Antony gone, Octavian entered Alexandria unopposed. The city that had once dazzled the ancient world with its libraries, temples, and bustling harbors now fell under Roman occupation. Cleopatra met Octavian face to face, still exuding the regality that had defined her reign. Contemporary accounts suggest that she appeared before him in full queenly attire, adorned with jewels and gold, her poise undiminished. She sought to charm Octavian as she had once charmed Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, but Octavian was not a man easily swayed by emotion or allure. His ambitions were purely political. He needed Cleopatra alive only long enough to parade her in his Roman triumph, a living symbol of Egypt's submission.
The thought of such humiliation was unbearable to Cleopatra. She, who had descended from gods, who had ruled as Isis incarnate, would not be dragged through the streets of Rome in chains. In the quiet of her mausoleum, surrounded by treasures and the relics of her dynasty, Cleopatra made her final decision. She would die as a queen, not live as a captive. The exact details of her death remain shrouded in mystery. The most famous version, recorded by Plutarch and later immortalized by poets and painters, claims that she arranged for a basket of figs to be brought to her chamber, concealing within it a small asp, the symbol of royal divinity and Egyptian sovereignty. Allowing the serpent to bite her, Cleopatra embraced death as an act of ultimate defiance, choosing the freedom of the afterlife over the chains of Rome. Her two attendants, Iris and Charmian, reportedly followed her into death. When Octavian's soldiers broke into the chamber, they found the queen lying serene upon her golden couch, dressed in royal robes, her face peaceful as if asleep. Octavian, though triumphant, was said to be struck by awe at the sight. He'd conquered Egypt, but in her death, Cleopatra had achieved something more enduring. She had conquered time itself, transforming from a mortal ruler into an eternal symbol. Cleopatra's death marked not only the end of her life, but the extinction of the Ptolemaic dynasty that had ruled Egypt for nearly 3 centuries. Her son, Caesarion, the child she bore to Julius Caesar, was captured and executed on Octavian's orders, ensuring that no legitimate heir could challenge Roman authority. Egypt was annexed as a Roman province, its wealth flowing directly into the coffers of the empire. The once great city of Alexandria became a jewel in Rome's imperial crown, a center of learning and commerce, but no longer a sovereign capital. Octavian, now undisputed ruler of the Roman world, returned to Rome and assumed the title Augustus, founding the Roman Empire. In that sense, Cleopatra's death signaled not only the end of Egyptian independence, but also the dawn of a new imperial age. Yet Cleopatra's legacy did not fade with her dynasty. Across the centuries, she has remained one of history's most enduring figures, her story retold in countless forms, by Roman historians seeking to moralize, by Renaissance poets yearning for tragedy, by modern filmmakers captivated by her allure. To the ancient Egyptians, she had been the living embodiment of Isis, the divine mother and protector. To the Romans, she was the seductive foreigner who threatened the moral fabric of their society. To later generations, she became a symbol of female power, intellect, and resilience. Each retelling reshaped her image, reflecting the anxieties and desires of its own era. What endures beyond all interpretations is Cleopatra's profound ability to transcend time. She was a woman who mastered the arts of politics, language, and persuasion in a world dominated by men. She ruled not through brute force, but through intellect and diplomacy. She understood that power was not merely a matter of armies and gold, but of perception and legacy. Even in defeat, she controlled her own narrative, transforming her death into an act of sovereignty. Cleopatra's story reminds us that history is not solely written by victors. It is also shaped by those who refuse to be forgotten.
The image of Cleopatra, her eyes lined in kohl, her figure draped in silks, her mind sharp as the double-edged sword of empire, continues to captivate because she embodies the eternal paradox of human ambition. She was both ruler and lover, strategist and dreamer, mortal and divine. Her downfall was tragic, but it was also transcendent. For in the ruins of her kingdom, she built an empire of memory that no conqueror could ever destroy. Through the centuries that followed, poets, playwrights, and historians would resurrect her again and again. Shakespeare's impassioned queen, George Bernard Shaw's intelligent diplomat, Hollywood's dazzling siren. Each incarnation reflected a different truth about her, yet none could fully capture the complexity of the woman who once ruled the ancient world. Cleopatra's power was not in her beauty, as so many legends suggest, but in her mind, in her ability to see the patterns of empire, to weave alliances, and to command loyalty in a realm where survival itself was an act of genius. The story of Cleopatra and Antony, of love entangled with politics and destiny, stands as one of the most enduring tales in the human narrative. It reminds us that even in the face of inevitable decline, there exists a beauty in defiance. Cleopatra's death was not simply the end of a reign, it was the beginning of a myth, one that continues to ripple through the imagination of humanity like the eternal flow of the Nile.
The death of Cleopatra in 30 BCE marked not just the fall of Egypt's last independent ruler, but the birth of an eternal myth. As her body was laid to rest in her royal mausoleum, the world shifted from the age of pharaohs to the age of emperors. Rome absorbed Egypt into its vast dominion, but Cleopatra's spirit refused to be conquered. In death, she transcended mortality, evolving into a symbol that would haunt and inspire humanity for over 2,000 years. The true legacy of Cleopatra lies not only in the empire she lost, but in the legend she created, a legend that blurred the line between history and imagination, fact and fascination. In the immediate aftermath of her death, Octavian, soon to be known as Augustus, sought to shape her image to his political advantage. For the Roman world, Cleopatra had to be remembered not as a tragic heroine or noble ruler, but as the foreign temptress who had brought Antony to ruin and threatened the Republic. This narrative was essential to justify Octavian's rise as the savior of Rome. His propaganda machine, already well-oiled, spread tales of Cleopatra's decadence, her manipulation, and her supposed witchcraft. She was depicted as an embodiment of the East's corruption, a woman who had dared to seduce Rome's greatest men and nearly overturned the destiny of civilization. In Roman art and literature, Cleopatra's image became a warning. Poets such as Horace and Virgil wrote of her downfall as a moral lesson about excess and hubris. In Virgil's Aeneid, the conflict at Actium was portrayed as a cosmic battle between Rome's disciplined virtue and Egypt's seductive chaos. Cleopatra's death symbolized the triumph of Roman order over Oriental passion. Yet even as the Romans demonized her, they could not fully erase her allure. The very qualities that they condemned, her intelligence, her charisma, her defiance, fascinated them. Cleopatra haunted their imaginations, appearing in sculptures, frescoes, and whispered tales across the empire. But time has a way of reshaping reputations. As the centuries passed, the sharp lines drawn by Roman propaganda began to blur. The medieval world, though distant from Cleopatra's Egypt, inherited her story through the writings of Plutarch, Dio Cassius, and other classical historians. To them, Cleopatra was no longer just a queen. She was a moral allegory, a symbol of the dangers of lust, ambition, and feminine influence. Christian scholars saw in her downfall a cautionary tale of sin and divine judgment. Yet even as they condemned her, they could not deny her majesty. The image of Cleopatra reclining in her palace, commanding armies and intellects alike, lingered as a paradox, a woman both condemned and admired. During the Renaissance, when Europe rediscovered the classical world with renewed passion, Cleopatra was reborn once again, not as a villain, but as a complex, tragic figure. The revival of Greek and Roman texts brought her story to the attention of artists, writers, and philosophers who were captivated by her wit and power. Painters like Titian and Guido Reni immortalized her final moments, draped in royal silks with the asp at her breast, her face serene and noble. In their hands, Cleopatra's death was transformed from an act of shame into an act of courage, the ultimate assertion of autonomy in the face of conquest.
Perhaps no one captured her spirit more completely than William Shakespeare in Antony and Cleopatra. Written in the early 17th century, The play reimagined Cleopatra, not as a mere seductress, but as a woman of infinite variety, passionate, intelligent, capricious, and deeply human. Shakespeare's Cleopatra defies simple categorization. She is neither goddess nor villain, but a living paradox of love and power. Age cannot wither her, nor custom stale her infinite variety, he wrote, a line that has defined her through the ages. In his hands, the Egyptian queen became a mirror for the complexities of the human soul, the yearning for greatness, the vulnerability of love, and the unyielding pride that defies defeat. Through Shakespeare, Cleopatra entered the collective consciousness of the modern world. Her story transcended time and geography, becoming a canvas upon which each era painted its own desires and fears. In the Enlightenment, she was celebrated as a political strategist whose intellect matched any man's. In the Romantic era, she became the epitome of doomed passion, the eternal lover whose heart burned too brightly for the mortal world. The Victorians, enthralled by Egyptology and the mysteries of the ancient world, rediscovered Cleopatra through archaeology. The opening of her world's tombs, temples, and relics reawakened fascination with the Nile's last queen. By the 19th century, Cleopatra had become an icon not only of sensual beauty, but also of cultural transformation. She embodied the intersection of East and West, femininity and power, mortality and myth. Artists like Jean-Léon Gérôme, Lawrence Alma-Tadema, and Alexandre Cabanel portrayed her amid marble halls and gilded thrones, surrounded by the opulence of Egypt's fading empire. Each brushstroke sought to capture the enigma of her existence, the balance between intellect and allure, command and vulnerability. The dawn of cinema in the 20th century brought Cleopatra to life once again in moving images. From Theda Bara's silent portrayal in 1917 to Elizabeth Taylor's legendary performance in 1963, filmmakers reimagined her for new audiences, blending historical drama with spectacle. The 1963 film Cleopatra, though infamous for its cost and production challenges, immortalized her on a scale never seen before. Taylor's Cleopatra was not merely a queen, but a force of nature, proud, political, and passionately human. The film's lavish sets, costumes, and cinematography transformed Cleopatra's story into a visual epic of ambition, love, and tragedy. But beyond Hollywood glamour, scholars continued to reassess Cleopatra's true identity. Modern historians and archaeologists began peeling away layers of Roman distortion to reveal a woman of remarkable intellect and vision. Cleopatra was fluent in at least 9 languages, the only Ptolemaic ruler known to speak Egyptian fluently. She was a patron of science, philosophy, and medicine, continuing the intellectual legacy of Alexandria's famed library and museum. She understood economics and governance deeply, stabilizing Egypt's currency and managing its agricultural resources during times of famine. Her rule was marked by cultural synthesis, combining Greek rationalism with Egyptian spirituality.
In the 21st century, Cleopatra's legacy resonates more than ever in discussions about gender, power, and representation. She stands as a symbol of female agency in a world dominated by male authority. A woman who ruled, negotiated, and fought on her own terms. Historians and feminists have worked to reclaim her story from centuries of reduction and exoticism, emphasizing her as a stateswoman, not merely a seductress. Modern portrayals, from novels to academic studies, depict her as a visionary who sought to preserve Egypt's sovereignty amid the tide of Roman imperialism. The fascination with Cleopatra also reflects humanity's eternal dialogue with history, the tension between fact and myth, reality and imagination. Each generation reshapes her story to reflect its own values. To some, she is the embodiment of love's destructive power. to others, the icon of independence and intellect. In truth, Cleopatra's greatest triumph lies in her ability to endure. Empires have fallen, civilizations have vanished, but her name still stirs emotion and wonder. The archaeological quest for Cleopatra's tomb remains one of the most tantalizing mysteries in Egyptology. Despite centuries of searching, her final resting place has never been definitively found. Many scholars believe she was buried near the temple of Taposiris Magna, west of Alexandria, alongside Antony. The discovery of her tomb would be one of the greatest archaeological revelations of modern times, not merely for its historical value, but for the chance to reconnect with a woman who has never ceased to captivate the human imagination. Yet, perhaps the mystery itself is fitting. Cleopatra, who lived between worlds, Greek and Egyptian, mortal and divine, belongs as much to legend as to history. Her elusive tomb mirrors the elusive truth of her life, veiled in splendor and secrecy. Cleopatra's influence also endures in modern culture. She appears in art, music, literature, and fashion. Designers evoke her aesthetic in gold and turquoise, serpentine jewelry, and kohl-lined eyes. Her story inspires novels and films, operas and symphonies. Pop culture continually reinvents her, from pop songs and digital games to historical dramas. Even today, she serves as a muse for those who challenge conventions, artists, leaders, and dreamers who see in her the timeless union of strength and sensuality. Her legend has also sparked profound philosophical reflections. Cleopatra's life embodies the eternal dance between destiny and choice. She was born into luxury, but lived in turmoil, wielding brilliance as both weapon and shield. Her fall was not weakness, but the inevitable collision of vision and empire. In her defiance of Rome, she preserved a spark of the old world, a reminder that even amid conquest, the spirit of civilization can endure through art, intellect, and courage.
The Nile, which once reflected her palaces and temples, continues to flow as it did in her time, carrying with it whispers of her name. The sands of Egypt shift over the ruins of her age, yet her story remains carved in human consciousness. Cleopatra represents the essence of what it means to be remembered, not merely for what one achieves, but for what one symbolizes. She reminds us that legacy is not measured by victory or defeat, but by the endurance of one's image and the power of one's story to inspire generations yet unborn. 2,000 years after her death, Cleopatra still commands the world's attention. She lives in the lines of Shakespeare, the strokes of Titian, the performances of cinema, and the pages of history. She is the eternal queen, not of Egypt alone, but of imagination itself. Her reign continues wherever ambition meets beauty, where intellect meets emotion, and where the human soul dares to defy destiny. In the final measure of time, Cleopatra's life stands as a bridge between East and West, myth and reality, mortality and immortality. She was the last of the pharaohs, but also the first of the truly modern rulers, a woman who understood that power is both political and psychological, that image can outlast empire. Her story, once written in papyrus and stone, now lives in the digital memory of the modern world, unbroken, undiminished, eternal. As long as humanity tells stories of love and loss, ambition and courage, Cleopatra will live on. Her shadow stretches from the sands of Egypt to the hearts of those who seek meaning in greatness and tragedy alike. She was more than a queen. She was the embodiment of civilization's longing for immortality. In her, the world remembers its own reflection, radiant, flawed, and forever reaching for the divine.
Join the exploration. Knowledge isn't just learned, it's felt. If today's story inspired you to see the world differently, then join the exploration.
Subscribe today and let's continue uncovering the mysteries that shape our world.